I won't say difficulty with understanding some of the questions, but I didn't know how to answer it.
Well, I think it'll be good to. Oh, Tim's joining us because I also had a couple of questions about a couple of the questions. But for the most part, I was able to um, put myself into a scenario where I could address each one of them. I mean, obviously, it talks about my organization or the company you work with, so I just kind of generalized it to society.
Right,
That
right.
might skew things as far as the original intention of the tool, but I think the original intention of the tool is to create awareness. I mean, isn't the whole point diversity awareness profile?
Yep,
So,
Right.
yeah.
that's it.
So, if it makes you stop and think, it's probably done its job.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's a good tool. Some of this, like, if to me, I guess, just my background, it was like common sense to think this way.
Right.
But then some of them I started to think about, no, you can't, like, especially in the United States, I think you just can't like go and be strong about it because you might get shot
Well, and
or abused or
right, no,
something.
and that works both ways because even the people, and I think this is one of the points, Tim, I don't mean to be putting words in your mouth, but I believe one of the lessons that comes from this tool is that if you swing too far to the fighter side of things, you create a whole different set of problems. And
Yes.
so, thank you for your excitement and your energy and your commitment and dedication, but could you just chill a little bit?
Yes, yes, and we do have folks that fall in that category.
Right, right. Well, I remember, and it might be true for all of us, back when we were those very impressionable college years, and when we took on a cause, we took on a cause with an extreme level of passion, and we were going to save the trillium flowers in the whatever, or save the this, or fight for that, or whatever. It's like it almost resonates very much with that youthful energy, going out there to change the world.
Well, and it's also impacted, and we're often influenced by world events as well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's true. Because
Yeah.
I was thinking like the questions that ask like, how did it say, did you confront someone when they're telling a joke? And I almost always like, why do you find that funny?
Yeah.
Like I don't hesitate because I don't find it funny. But
Hmm.
in
Right.
today's time with the extreme behaviors that's existing,
Yeah.
I would second guess that.
Well, I would say to you that I would have to be in the right set of circumstances to feel comfortable confronting it directly.
Hmm.
And I think that's why I think you're talking about this is line item 4
Right.
in this. And it's kind of like refusing to participate. Well, I don't have to sit there and laugh, and I don't have to sit there and tell another joke or anything like that. But I also don't need to confront the person telling the joke if that would be, I don't know, if that would end up causing more trouble there. And if I'm going to do it, I would rather do it privately than do it in front of everyone else who might be present. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's just one, somebody or another, and he says something inappropriate. I promise you, he's going to get that look. And, and I might just say, seriously, but if it was in a group kind of a setting, I don't think that you really successfully change people's behavior by humiliating them in front of others.
Hmm.
They're just going to get defensive. So I think that's like if you chose a 4 on all of these, you're going to end up as the ultimate fighter.
Right.
Mm,
So I think that what the spectrum is basically saying is that if we can just get people 80%, 85% of the way towards that, be a good change agent with a little bit of the fight at least happening in your head, even if it isn't happening outwardly. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't
That's
know.
where I came out as change agent.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me go ahead and label the call and we can kind of continue this discussion. So, hi, everybody. It's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're talking about the diversity awareness profile. And let me just look. This was put out by John Wiley. Is Wiley just the publisher of it, or Tim,
Yes.
are they actively involved in providing diversity training?
No, just the publisher.
They're the publisher. Okay, so somebody is actually the author of this, and yeah. All right. Anyway, um, but I thought it'd be very good for us to kind of take a look at it. So for those of you that are just joining the call, we did send this over to everybody. In an email we sent yesterday. Yeah, and I have it. I can slide over to everyone again if you'd like. A couple of people thought I wanted them to fill it out and send it over. Well, it's a PDF, so that would be very difficult. I thought, no, everyone could just kind of run their own little tally, print out the little sheet if they want and circle things if they want and come up with whatever their score would end up being. Personally, I scored an 82. T. Waldman Williams sent me that she scored a 94, which would put her in the fighter range. And Linda, you want to tell people what you scored?
I think was it 92?
Oh yeah, I'm holding your paper in front of me. Yeah, you got a 92, which is also in the fighter range of doing things. So anybody else? Brian, what did you end up scoring, or did you?
83.
83. Okay, that puts you right on the edge. If I'm looking at their diagram here, that 83 puts you on the edge between change agent and fighter. And
Now, years ago, when I was using this tool and doing work, I mapped out as a change agent. For this particular call, I scored an 88, which puts me in that fighter.
In the fighter mode, right? And I wonder, as we map this to the change grid, we're going to see how each of these five, I don't know what you call them, wedges in their spectrum would actually express themselves behaviorally. Because I believe that if you've got a range of 84 to 96, there's a whole range of behaviors that we might also be able to identify or predict based on how high the number really is. In the fighter range, and for that matter, I mean, a change agent of 72 is going to behave differently than a change agent at 83. So I think it'll be interesting to see if we can figure out what are the actual behaviors as we overlay this on the change grid. So did anybody else fill it out, get a score? Yeah. All right. Well, feel free to do that. It is a very interesting kind of thing. I have a couple of observations I'd like to make about the profile to get the conversation going. And so let's, for just a moment, go to this diagram up top. As I said last time around, I understand the idea about concentric circles, that as far as what are the distinguishing factors in diversity, what are the key elements that contribute to that diversity, the things in the darker gray are the primary ones. I don't believe they're arranged in any particular configuration. I think they just, spaced them out so they fit very nicely. And then they moved further out and said that there are other things that are going to influence the primary. These are secondary things that could be impacting it. And if you go even further out, there could be different organizations that are contributing other elements or could contribute other opportunities inside of the world of diversity. Did I get that right, Tim?
Yeah, so let me speak to that real quickly. So this is an adaptation from some work done by two psychologists, Marilyn Loden and Judy Rossner. And it's gone by a couple of different names, but sometimes called the diversity wheel. And so it was an attempt to illustrate the various dimensions of diversity within each of us. And as you just pointed out, that there is this primary set of dimensions and then the secondary. And so the idea was that sometimes between the primary and the secondary, the distinction might be whether it's something we can see in a person, or whether we need to, as we talk about with the iceberg model, needing to go below the waterline to begin to understand some of those secondary dimensions of diversity. And then ultimately that outer layer, which a lot of folks don't give consideration to when we talk about this diversity space, is the fact that within organizations, there are dimensions of diversity. Big ones become management versus non-management, those who work in the corporate office versus those who work in the field, and how they perceive treatment within the organization. But an update to this model was that in that centerpiece where it says diversity dimensions is personality. which creates a whole different dynamic of discussion when you begin to talk about introvert versus extrovert personality types and how they get within
Absolutely.
organizations and et cetera. So Karen Stinson, who was the owner of the Pro Group, which was a diversity consulting firm, is the creator of the DAP instrument that we're looking at today. She has since sold her business and gone off into the great land of retirement.
Well, now, is she
Interesting.
saying, or are you suggesting that personality goes in the middle, or maybe it's a primary?
And that it goes in the middle is one of the updated models to this.
And so are they then saying that ultimately, while you might fall into some of these different diversity dimensions in the primary ring, there are more diversity dimensions that are core to people's personalities?
Yes.
And so that's even more than primary. Maybe it's like essential, maybe that's foundational, maybe I don't know a word to give it, but it sounds like it's even more prevalent and powerful than the primaries would be.
Yeah. And in fact, with one major client, we were talking about organizational culture, and a gentleman one of the leaders was trying to give me insight into their culture. And he talked about personality differences. And when I asked him for an example, he said, "Oh, easy. If we're in a staff meeting and you don't say anything during the course of the meeting, people are either thinking or saying this about you. Oh, Tim must not know a whole lot. That's why he's not saying much in the meeting."
Right.
And so it could just be a matter of, introvert versus extrovert. But he said clearly to me that their organization highly values extrovert personality types. So imagine if you are an introvert in that organization and you began to pick up those microaggressions, how that begins to impact how you contribute to the business.
That's really fascinating, because as I'm looking at this arrangement, it seems that when you ask most people to define diversity or equity or inclusion, they're going to talk about the things of the primary ring.
Yes.
That's the subject matter that we seem to be talking about, reading about, etc. Where in fact, diversity really does express itself in countless ways. And even if I were to say within a particular ethnicity, there could be countless variations or countless dimensions in diversity within a given ethnicity or a given gender or a given age range or whatever it can be. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and it comes into play when we began talking about our interpersonal skills, right? And how we interact with one another. I always like to say, when we were kids in grade school and the report came home saying that we play well with the other kids, that was just a way of looking at interpersonal skills. And from 3 foot tall to 6 foot tall, now that we're adults, we're still asking that same question.
Right.
We just call it, you think about a job description, it tends to always say that you must have good interpersonal skills. Well, they're
Right.
just saying you
Now,
have to be able to play along with folks.
does anybody else remember the grade school, the report cards we got in grade school? And we would get 2 grades. One was like for the subject matter itself, and one was for like citizenship or something.
Yes,
It
absolutely.
was really more about not only that we knew our stuff, but that we played well with others. We didn't cause fights. We were attentive. We were all of these qualities that apparently they associate with good citizenship. So even that, you go back to that there was, you know, a lack of diversity or a lack of awareness. There we are. That's what we're talking about. A lack of awareness about the full range of diversity and how it expresses itself and plays itself out in different areas of life.
I
Very
think this is interesting because I kind of scaled back on some. I'm probably more of the fighter than the change agent.
yeah.
And it's not so much that I'm looking out for it, but that's my background. Like I come from a multicultural, multi-ethnic, my father is a biracial South African. I was born in Jamaica. My mom's from Portugal. So,
Yeah.
we have this unique mix in our family. So I am quite sensitive to it, but I think my approach, being in the world that we live in now, is uniquely different than how I go about uh, conf confronting someone when I hear a joke or
Mm.
something like that. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna hesitate per se, but I find a way to immediately address the issue. Like I don't let it go by
All
because
right.
I
Well,
want
that's
them to
interesting.
know. And my wife used to have this thing where, I'm 1.89 meters, so I'm 6'2". And so
Mhm.
she always had this thing about how I approach, because she used to say, "Don't flex your abs because it'll come across a certain way."
Right, right,
Abs
right. Yeah, no.
is a code for angry black syndrome. So she
Oh,
used to say, she used to say, "Be
oh
careful
my
about
gosh.
flexing your abs,"
And here I'm thinking
because
you're talking about your abs.
no, that was her code for, like, you're trying to have a decent conversation, but you just have to understand that it may come across a certain way.
Yeah, well, and I think, if you look at this over here, that may fall in the category of appearance. It has always been, um, I don't know, it's a fact. I don't know what to really call it, but that the taller you are, the more likely you are to be promoted. So wasn't that something that they noticed in the way people were
Yes.
advancing, that short, well, even stay within
Hmm.
inside the category of men. Short men don't progress as much or as quickly as tall men do.
Hmm.
What does height have to do with much of anything? Nevertheless, that is something that is a difference that uh, people knowingly or unknowingly are giving favor to one of its expressions and the opposite to the other expression. So, Tim, is this what you're actually teaching about when you're doing diversity training? You
Oh,
get
oh, absolutely. And I forget the author's name, but there was a woman that wrote a book, The 4 Minute Cell. And in it, she talks about Janet Elsey, um, these dimensions of diversity that people pick up on immediately in the first 4 minutes, particularly in a sales scenario. And appearance is one of them.
Mhm.
And really quickly, I was doing a session with a large client, and it tapped into this appearance conversation. And this woman said that there was a guy who worked for one of their vendors. He had to make delivery of parts to their office. And she said, at first glance of him, looking at his appearance, he was just repulsive. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, he was just, ugh. And I said, well, define ugh.
Yeah.
And she laughed, and she said, well, he had tattoos all over his arms and up around his neck. He had earrings and body piercings and parts of the body I just don't think you should pierce.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so she says, but I would caution us as to how we judge people. And I said, well, that's great, but why? And she said, well, because one day I brought my daughter to work, and it happened to be a day that this guy had to make deliveries to our office. And I said, yeah, so what? And she laughed and she said, well, on such and such date, my daughter and that guy are getting married.
Ha!
No.
But the beauty of it is that in the end, she said, now that I've gotten to know him, i.e., below the waterline, she
Right.
said, he's a really nice guy.
Of course he
Mhm,
is.
mhm.
He's just willing to go through quite a bit of pain in order to express himself artistically.
But it showed the conflicting values and, the lack of understanding and awareness around diversity in some of these dimensions.
Sure, exactly right, exactly right.
But it took her daughter falling in love with this guy to get her below the waterline.
Right, right. But see, something has to do that. Something brings the
Yes.
value of diversity uh,
Yes.
to it, because I think a lot of people think that the goal is to eliminate diversity.
No.
And that's far from it, because if for no other reason, then I believe it's in the realm of the impossible. But who would want that? Who would want everything to be absolutely the same everywhere, everyone, everywhere, all the time?
So
Um,
that situation that Tim just described, that raised the level of attention.
mhm,
Is
mhm.
that what we raised the level of tension? So the tension went up in terms of
Right. Yeah, the
the
relationship
the
between
awareness.
tension and attention. Yep, 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 yep.
Okay, got
Mhm.
it, got
Yeah,
it.
we don't notice anything that doesn't cause us any tension. I mean, having the whole mechanism for attention is that something is going on, and you would know the neurochemistry, not me, but something is happening, and your brain has decided it needs to be focused upon. And for whatever reasons, as it commands our, you have to ask what's driving it. Is it the tension that we have that is commanding the attention? Or is the brain somehow or another just saying, like, pay attention to this before we even experience any real tension around it? I would like to think the tension drives attention.
Yeah, it's the senses pick up on things that the brain has yet to process,
All
right?
right. So
So
we may
the
not be
emotion,
consciously aware of it, but our brain is.
right, right,
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
yeah.
All right. Okay.
T, at the risk of diverting the conversation a little bit, something you mentioned makes me think about this. So whenever I hear about diversity, people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yep.
And the equity part is what triggers me, because it goes to what you were saying earlier. Why would we want everybody to kind of be the same, right? I'm all for the diversity and the inclusion piece, and I'm just wondering, maybe from Tim's perspective, is there something that's unique about the way I'm looking at it, or is this a common?
Let me just chime in this, and then Tim, you can go into a deep explanation, because I think I learned this from you, that there's a difference between equity and equality.
Equality, exactly. Remember that Bernie Sanders was mocked because he could not answer that question when he was asked.
Yeah. And didn't somebody send me something that showed someone picking apples, and there's a ladder, and different ways they're showing the relationship between the person picking it and the ladder, the size of the ladder. They were actually able to show the difference between equality and equity. I'll go hunt for that. Tim, you go ahead and.
Well, yeah, the one that we've used is this image of three kids trying to look over a fence and watch a baseball game. And the tallest kid is the only one of the three that is able to stand and look over the fence. And so then the second image is each of, the other two kids standing on a crate, but the crates are of different height, just based on the height of the other two kids, the shortest versus the second tallest. And so when we talk about equity, that's the illustration of the image that's often used to try and make that distinction, as you all have said, between equality and equity.
In fact, I just found that, so let me drag it somewhere so I can open it.
Tim, in your work, does that come up as a common thing, or do people not go there?
It comes up. Yeah. Oftentimes it just depends on how much airtime we have, but yes, this piece does come up. But the biggest thing is just trying to get people beyond diversity dimensions, dealing with race and gender.
It illustrates it well, because it really says that it's the way that we manage resources that ultimately brings us into equity. Because if we treat everyone and everything in the exact same way, their actual experiences are less likely to actually change in a meaningful way, like is shown on the right side here. I can say, like, oh, everyone can't fit over see over the fence, so I'm going to give everyone the exact same box. Well, I didn't change anything at all about the relative heights. I just was able to put one more individual to a place where they could see what was going on. But here we got this guy in the purple shirt over here who's not able to do much of anything. So I think that when we talk about equality, we are, let's say, if we decide in favor of equality, we may not be doing what is actually in the best interests of the people that are involved. Equity is more addressing the actual needs or the actual situations. Is that, Tim, is that how you position it?
Yeah. Yes. And so there was something that came up in something that triggered me on this diversity awareness profile in one of our prior calls that caused me to take a stab at trying to see how it may overlay on the grid. And I sent that over to T. And so that's really how we got here today.
Then let's kind of roll into where I think that fits. I see the change grid coming into this in at least two places. The first place is the natural relationship between the change grid or change works and the existence of other psychometric tools. So we have always said that the change grid was never intended to replace any tool whatsoever. It really is an exercise in merging brilliance and helping us to kind of see a more and more complete picture. So we're not asking anybody to stop using whatever tools they hold near and dear. We instead say that the change grid ends up being the natural next step following the use of whatever that tool or instrument may be. And so that's what I see right here. So for example, as you took the little profile and you look at the activity, challenge others on racial, ethnic, sexually derogatory comments. I could copy and paste that into the ChangeWorks system, and right there, I could be saying, how difficult is that for you to do? How important is it? How, I could put people through a full ChangeWorks profile using this diversity awareness profile as the activity list. Because it's great that we can say now people are aware, but I want to know how likely are they to actually follow through and do something about it. So I want to know really what's going on the level of tension. So in order to make the results of this profile more actionable, I think that the change grid would be pulled in very easily as a next natural step in the process. Thoughts about that?
Would you change those terms to a verb?
Well, they already start with a verb. So I got challenge. That's good. I got speak up. So if I want to make the best list I possibly can, then I need to apply our principles for defining a good activity, which is they must start with a verb. And it needs to be a verb of some sort of meaning. I'll get to that in a second. Usually we want some sort of a verb that indicates some external behavior rather than an internal process. And so I only want one verb. The other thing is I only want one object of it. So I would say, and I'll throw this to all of you guys, do you think that challenging others on racial derogatory comments is different than on ethnic derogatory comments, is different than sexually derogatory comments? Do you feel those things as three separate situations that you might rate differently?
I do.
Yes.
Okay, in which case you would want this to be three separate activities. Now, as you do this, you just have to appreciate that we'd already be asking people to fill out a change grid on 25 activities, and that's a pretty big ask. So, or 24 activities. So we just got to be sensitive to the fact that too many activities is going to result in respondent fatigue. They're going to be less likely to complete the profile. So, you really got to be just aware of what's going on as you do this. Now, you might say, well, maybe I'm going to focus on the ones that are problematic. So maybe I'm going to do a deeper dive on the activities where the average rating was below a 2 because it's not getting enough attention. Or maybe if I'm seeing all these heavy 4s, I might want to do one there because they might be overdoing something, and it'd be interesting to explore what their motivations are for that from a change grid perspective. So yeah, now
and, we can also identify and select from that list of 24
exactly
any that pertain to a particular issue that organization to be challenged.
That's right. So, but again, if you want to make the best list, that being said, I could just cut this and paste this as it is directly into the profile and let somebody fill it out, because I think the whole point here is not really the subject matter as much as it's about the willingness to challenge others. So, so maybe it's just challenge others on derogatory comments. I don't know that I need to spell out what those happen to be. But point is, if you're going to create a ChangeWorks profile around this, there are some thoughts you might want to ponder about choices you're making with activities you're selecting and how you're choosing to focus them. One other I'd like to point out is number 3, think about. Think about is an internal process. I want to operationalize it, find a verb that's more about action. I could plot this, make no mistake about it. That's a verb. I could plot it. But if I really want to do something more meaningful for my client, I'd like to know when someone is thinking about the impact of their comments on others before they speak or act. What does that really translate into? What's the actual behavior? Yeah, I just want them to think about it and then speak or act, or do I want to think about them and those thoughts should somehow or another, um, what do we say, factor in to what I'm going to say or do before I say it or do it. So you with me there? It's like I'm more, what's the doing part of this? So maybe that is something about, we got to just change the verb. Instead of thinking about the impact, what I want to do is to factor in the impact. I want to edit based on the impact my comments on others. Yeah, I want to, you get the idea. Whenever possible, we'd like to make these into actual action sorts of activities, external behaviors.
Well, one of the things that I went through mentally as I was looking at this list was thinking about the energies.
Yep.
And so here, clearly that's analytical, which is important to perceive behavior, because you would want folks to consider, as this is stating, to give thought to, if I say this, if I behave this way,
Right.
how might it impact my colleagues, my customers?
Exactly. If I'm going to do that activity, if I'm going to confront whatever, do I want to come across as an expressive driver, a driven driver, an analytical driver, an amiable driver, and even look at the tertiary energy there? Maybe I want to be more of an analytical, amiable driver because there is some specific behavior. There is an assessment that's happening as people think about doing these things and ultimately do them. So there is an analytical element. But first and foremost, if someone's going to be challenging others, do I want them to challenge me coming from which energy? An expressive challenge, an amiable challenge, an analytical challenge, or a driver challenge?
Yeah.
You got to kind of think about that. So you're absolutely right. We can also, if we're going to move this into the change grid, we can look at each activity and say, where on this change grid, would this activity be most effectively positioned, and what's wrong with other locations? So why wouldn't we choose other locations? That could be a great discussion to have around this as well. One other thing I'll bring up, and again, for those of you that are crafting activity lists, it's this level of detail that is going to help you to really master the thing. Activity number 5, don't use tentative words. So do I really want you to just avoid using language or making comments that reinforce stereotypes? Is avoid my desired outcome? What's my desired outcome? What's the real thing I want you to do?
Stop it.
Stop it. So let's use that word. Stop using language or making comments that reinforce stereotypes. Just stop it. So, yeah. And then I look at this one: assume and convey the message that diverse individuals are as skilled and competent at others. Assume is a very weak verb, but starting with convey is, now we got something powerful going on. So I don't need 2 verbs. If there's one that's better than the others, please favor that one. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but you guys get the idea. It's a nice solid foundation on which to extract an activity list. And now you can start coaching people or put together, like Tim, if Tim wanted to administer the profile, the awareness profile, in advance of a training program, and take the information that he gets to create a ChangeWorks profile. This can help him customize his training program. So yeah. So anyway, it's all good stuff, but that's probably one of the biggest ways that I could use this profile to connect what we do with what's already being done out there. So we're the natural next step in the use of any psychometric tool.
Yeah, I really like the idea of using this list to create an activity list.
Yep.
With the change grid. Yeah.
And the general practice, if you really want to do best practices around this, is that you would take this and you would then build out an exhaustive activity list. So look at these, and any way you can break them down, like this one, do all I can to help create an environment in which all customers feel respected and valued. Well, I get what this statement is all about, but there are multiple variables inside of this that could give rise to, I'm going to say, a dozen or more activities. So first of all, I don't know what do all I can to help. Get rid of that. Let's say create an environment in which and is it customers? How about coworkers? How about whatever? And if the company has customers and has coworkers and has other what do you want to call it? I want to say they're kind of important people, but they're not the boss and they're not an employee, but they support you and you got to keep them impressed, like the media or whatever. I forget what you call those kinds of people, but they're kind of collaborative contributors. Stakeholders. That's the word I was going for. Stakeholders, the media, and feel respected and valued. Respected is different than valued. So, so can you kind of feel like you put together all those combinations and permutations, and you could end up building a whole activity list just around this one kind of seed activity that the profile has provided.
Something you said before about what the change grid is quite useful for, and this idea about readiness. And this here, it seems like Tim can use this to, since there's so much pushback now with even understanding DEI and what it really is, like that question of equity and those kinds of things. Maybe this could be used to even see which organization their sense of readiness to actually explore,
exactly. Well, in fact, let's kind of dig deeper into what you're bringing up there, starting with the obvious. This is called the diversity awareness profile. It's all about awareness. It's this band of the engagement rings. It's awareness. That's really great. But what do we know? Nothing is going to change if it just stays at the awareness level. Now, that being said, I do believe that making people aware of things does draw more attention to them. And so there might be some sort of automatic personal growth. They might do something about it, but I promise you, if any change is really going to occur, they have to do what next? What do you have to do after awareness if anything's going to change?
Intention.
They have to formulate some sort of an intention. So again, some of it might happen organically. Some changes might just because that seed's been planted, but usually we need to make some sort of a conscious, deliberate statement of intention. And that's going to have maybe an upgrade expression where we have a lot of energy around it. Maybe we're being more thoughtful around the intention. Maybe we're just saying like, well, of course there should be an intention, and kind of putting it down here in power apathy a little bit. And ultimately those intentions must give way to what? If we want anything to change.
Someone doing something.
They got to get engaged in the doing part. So yeah, you got to formulate an intention, but how many of you have ever formulated an intention that never got followed through on? I mean, that's pretty routine. So isn't that the whole world of New Year's resolutions?
Exactly.
So come on, we got to get involved. We got to get
installing a garbage disposal in the kitchen.
Have you told us what your plans for the weekend are?
Listen, man, I stepped over that thing for about a week until I got
there you
tired.
go. Exactly. And see, and why hasn't he done it yet? He's not at the threshold. Truth be told, he does not find his current situation troublesome enough yet to bother doing anything definitive. Mind you, he did go buy the new garbage disposal and he
have the Home
did
Depot
out of the car, right?
That's funny.
So There you go. There you go. All right. So, let's see, Brian, to your point, yeah, it is creating that awareness, and that awareness is really wonderful, but we have to operationalize it. And that's my issue. There's a lot of psychometric tools out there that are very descriptive. They do a fantastic job of getting people to be aware of things about themselves and others that they didn't know. But a lot of them think that their work is then done. And I think no, the real work can now begin. So let's build on whatever that awareness is, and let's find some way. I'm going to say operationalize it. You can come up with whatever word you want, but we got to go from there to intention to engagement in order for things to ultimately be executed.
I like that word operationalize. I'm thinking like this, I could have used this being here in Nicaragua where I had to have the conversations with these stakeholders. You know, we're going out into these rural areas with security.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone came and had a talk with us, like their version of Tim about respecting the culture, you know, when you go in people's homes and people are like fighting as to why. I'm like, you're in a foreign country with security. I don't
Mhm.
want to get shot to Nicaragua, okay? So let's be respectful.
Yeah, well, exactly.
It's common
Right.
sense.
Our passports do not say Nicaragua on them.
Right,
We're visitors.
right.
Behave accordingly. Okay. All right. So yeah, so we could certainly do a lot with the change grid around this. But the other thing that I said we could look at is figure out how does this overlay on the change grid? And I'll tell you that I'm not entirely sure that it's going to be any sort of a direct overlay. But I will tell you that they have chosen to depict these as a continuum. And how do I know it's a continuum? Because it's score based. So if you've got a score of under 24, then you're naive. And by the way, that would be a 1 on everything in order to score that low. So I would imagine that these are people that are truly 100% naive. Yeah, I would want to adjust the scale. Tim, that would mean that for someone to fall into naive, they would have to answer no. Are you saying, Tim, in this tool, are they basically saying that anyone who can't rate at least a 1 on all of these is too unaware to even begin to assess themselves? Is that what's being suggested by no range here?
Yeah, because it's almost like when we talk about on the grid, and I remember one call where someone asked you about the pre-awareness stage.
Yeah. All right. Well, then, if
You know,
that,
and yeah, that don't know what you don't know, clueless,
yeah. So
don't
then
pay
we would
attention.
need to move naive over to here.
Yes.
So naive is rather clueless.
Mm-hmm.
No ability, and they don't see any challenge because they don't see anything. So naive is going to be very far on the in-grid side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that next category, this is interesting. Just let me read for you what the naive description is. And this is in the handout you guys all have. People in this category do not even realize they exhibit biased behavior. Often, when they offend others, they are not aware that their own behavior is offensive. They frequently accept stereotypical statements as facts. They may even unknowingly commit illegal acts. No score was indicated for this category because scores can vary widely for the truly naive offender. For example, a naive person can believe that they almost always is a truthful response to many of the questions because he or she does not comprehend biased behavior. That's very interesting. So it's not for the naive category. Okay, there could be naive people who are scoring along the entire spectrum. Is that what we've just read here?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
they just plain don't know. All right. When we have to answer the question, where is that coming from? It is coming from a very far in-grid, clueless kind of a place to be. I was also wondering if naive can be very far down grid, but in order to be down grid, you have to have command. or at least perceive yourself as having great command of whatever's going on. So maybe there's a little bit of naive that's coming here,
there's more,
or
the downgrade, there would be more awareness versus
yeah. But in both cases, I would say would be in the danger zone. And because we know all danger zones are neighbors of one another, then I can certainly see this primary location for naive being in grid, being right next door to down-grid. So
Yeah.
they don't
That
know, they don't know.
that
Yeah.
description to me sounds like they're in their own world.
Well, they
Like,
are in their own world. They're in a world where such things have never been thought about. So, welcome. Yeah. All right. So they're naive. Yeah. Don't know that I agree with the actual word naive. Naive implies an innocence
hmm,
to what's going on, an immaturity, those kind of things. When you think about using the adjective naive to describe someone, um, it's not quite as clueless as I believe these people really are. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, play around with it, but
well, yeah, because sometimes the behavior is such where they do not recognize that
right.
that behavior could be offensive,
Yep,
right?
that's absolutely right. They don't know. They're not that self-aware. So yeah, okay. So that's a good location for it, far away from emotional intelligence, no real awareness, because they probably live in a very isolated kind of world. How do they not notice these things? How are they not aware of these things? But that's where naive would fall. They're unaware of their behavior, how the behavior impacts. The next possibility is the perpetuator. They are aware of biases and prejudices, but they continue the negative behavior and reinforce the stereotype. So that's between 24 and 47. 24 activities, that would mean that they're averaging slightly below 2 for each of their responses, slightly below 2, and 2 would be a seldom, so less than seldom is where they would put it. So yeah, so I look at this and I go, well, you know, this kind of continuing these sorts of behaviors could happen in different places on the change grid. So where's one place you think the perpetuator might be living on the change grid for them to keep doing the stuff that they're fully aware of is not, uh, you know, yeah, not good, not cool. What do you think?
It seems more of a downgrid thing to me.
Seems like more of a down-grid thing to me. So I would say that if there's kind of a, um, what's my word? There is an apathy about it. They're aware of it, but they don't care to change it. They're not bothered enough by it personally, or believe that their behavior is problematic enough that they should change their behavior. So that feels very downgrid to me. Very downgrid to me.
Yeah, I was challenged with trying to plot this one,
Well,
but what you guys just said makes sense to me.
yeah, but I would like to add that there is a perpetuator who is also an instigator, that they are fully aware that's inappropriate and they are consciously, deliberately making these kinds of comments. That others would say. So there's kind of an apathy to the whole thing, but I think there's another expression of it that isn't on the spectrum, but I'd like to add it anyway. And that is, where does the instigator go? Tim, are you with me on that? Are you,
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you know where the instigators fall? Because I got to believe they come up in your conversations, your programs around this.
I think the instigator is far up grid.
Is far up grid, because why are they doing it? I have always believed that these kinds of behaviors are coming from a place of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So
And it's much, and I think the energy is defined much more as expressive.
right. Now, if I wanted to lean them some way, I might lean them towards the driven expressive, because it seems like they are trying to stir things up, or are okay supporting the stirring up of things. you know. And if we look at other layers of the change grid, this is where the motivator is. This is where the whatever. I mean, I know we just made up instigator, but that's an energy I think is definitely up grid and probably a little bit out grid. Yeah. You guys agree with that?
That
Would that
works.
be the same as I'm thinking of the psychology, they call it the drama triangle, that they say all
Yeah, you have to have,
stories are based on a perpetrator, I think is the
yeah,
word
there
they
has to be
use,
a victim, a perpetrator, and
and
there
a hero.
a
Right.
hero. Yeah, and if
Yeah.
the hero is absent, then you just get a big, well, usually the perpetrator succeeds in squashing the victim. Uh,
Right. So would the instigator be the same as the
no,
perpetrator, or is
because the
that different?
helper or that hero, it has a positive intention. I believe the instigator is continuing to perpetuate stereotypes because they're coming from a place of fear. And the easiest thing for them to do is to make sure sufficient numbers of others, among others, are also frightened to the point that they become a force to be reckoned with.
Ah,
You
okay.
know, if we go back to common ground training, one of the things common ground does talk about is that the pendulum is always in motion. And it's when you swing to any extreme in any direction that the problems come to be known. So do we need to swing out to an extreme in order to have a positive impact? Or is the fact that we're even leaning in a particular direction enough? You know what I mean? Does the pendulum need to swing to the extreme? Can't it swing within the green circle or between the green and the red circle and still allow us? Do we need to go to a danger zone? Right. So that's the, and I think, you know, if we look at politics, the problem with extreme, yeah, there you go. Victim rescuer and persecutor rescuer.
Right,
Yep, yep.
right. Yeah.
Um,
The interesting thing about that is, though, in that triangle that I remember seeing, they'll always put a P in the middle because they say it's all based on perception. So the
yeah.
persecutor is the one that causes the drama, and then you have a victim on the other side. But sometimes what the psychologist says, you can be your own perpetrator. Like you could be the one that becomes the instigator
Oh,
just by
absolutely.
the way that you're expressing things. And so we can play all three of those roles,
Yeah, and
is what
you're
it was
absolutely
saying.
right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So I've just added rescuer. We'll see if they fit, but you know, staying true to this, to the model that we're looking at, let me at least make sure that I've color coded these so that we know that that's our own doing before we you know, get things too confused. But perpetuator, as they've described it, does imply that the person is aware of it, but they're continuing to do it, and it feels like it's coming more from a place of apathy that they are looking at. Now, if I go up to avoider, an avoider, let's look at the range for avoiders and their brief description. Tolerates unjust behaviors from others and plays it safe. So avoider is an interesting word. It's almost like I want to call it a tolerator. You know, avoider, tolerator, avoider, tolerator. So it's avoiding the confrontation. What are they avoiding?
Hmm.
They're avoiding doing something about unjust behaviors, correcting them, challenging them. What are they avoiding? Let's see if the deeper read says people in this category are aware of the biases in themselves and others. They are working on their known prejudices, but they are reluctant to address inappropriate behavior by others. They try to play it safe by saying nothing, and this behavior is often perceived as acceptance. They are sometimes thought of as silent supporters.
Hmm.
So it directs them to take a look at how they responded to activity 1 and 2, which is challenging folks
Yep,
and speaking up.
right. And so that avoider, by just by that description, feels more what direction? Upgrade, downgrade, in-grid, out-grid.
I think it's more in-grid for me. It seems like it's between naive and the center,
So
Mhm.
more
somewhere in there.
avoid, yeah, because they're just
Yeah.
going like, let people be, let's not get involved.
I like that.
We can work on ourselves, but we don't need to be getting too much in, in the fray of things.
It reminds me of Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail,
Tell us.
where he's admonishing the minister or the ministerial community there in Birmingham to actually do activity 1 and 2 there in Birmingham, because they were silent and they really took that position of avoiding getting involved in that conflict.
Yeah, because I do think you got to have some strategy when it comes to choosing your battles and deciding where to put your resources, your energy, etc. And so is that part of what you're getting to, Tim? Is that you don't just go out there and fight just to be fighting. You have to come at it with some thoughtfulness. Is that where
Yeah, yeah, because I think ultimately that's the whole idea when I look at this and consider the grid, is moving from this awareness level to actually getting to execution.
Yeah, yep.
And if I remember his letter correctly, when I met John Lewis, he stated something to the extent that people fight each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they're separate. They're separate because they don't communicate. They don't communicate because they haven't come to the table.
Yep.
So he was speaking towards that ideal common ground.
Yep, I agree. All right, so change agents. We can probably just predict where this one's going to fall. But in this category, people are not only aware of the biases in themselves and others, they are also realize the negative impacts of acting on those biases. They are willing to take action when they encounter inappropriate words or behaviors. Change agents try to make a difference when there is clear evidence of discrimination or bias. Yeah, you're in a position to help others. Your plan should include well thought out ideas that will decrease bias and discrimination in your organization. So, where you want to put this one?
That sounds analytical.
Sounds analytical. And first and foremost, it sounds like there's
right where you were just now.
driver element definitely going on.
Yeah.
It's coming from the right heart space. And yeah, there's some analytical element that's in it. But I think if we're going to be looking for any kind of a continuum, that's where it would end up being. Yeah, starting inside the green circle, change begins in the mind. And then that intention has been formulated, then the change agent's going to get engaged in whatever's going on. The word might extend too far out grid for my liking, but you get the idea of that it's over here. And then the fighter, well, you can just know without even have to think about it. The fighter's going to be out grid. Now, so a continuum has given rise here, and that is that as someone increases their awareness and becomes more aware of the challenge, if they do whatever is necessary to increase their ability to meet that challenge, they're going to end up in a decent, workable place. So keep in mind that avoiding conflict is a very solid strategy if you'd like to fill your life without conflict. Right. So we can't say that there's no logic in avoiding. There's good logic in avoiding. Why should I step into harm's way? Why should I do whatever? Because I don't feel like I have enough ability to meet the higher challenges, but I can meet the challenge of a 3, 4, 5 by simply avoiding it. 3, 4, 5. That's one of the things I can do. So yeah, they said avoiding is I'm still aware of it. I know some things are going on. I'll work on myself, but I'm not going to be challenging and confronting others.
So, and the danger in that, in this context, is that your group, your category could wind up being next that's attacked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. So I can see that. And I think we can then safely say that this spectrum, as far as naive, avoider, change agent, or rather naive, avoider, change agent, and fighter exists along this continuum. if I need to make everything fit on the continuum, I would have to figure out how a perpetuator goes between naive and avoider on the heart line. I don't believe an avoider is right smack dab. I don't know about that. Remember the center of the change grid, I am detached. So is detachment a form of avoidance? Is avoidance just a natural side effect of being detached?
I think it could be.
It could be. And so let's scoot it over a little bit and see, can I come up with some rationale for how someone, okay, perpetuator, people in this category are aware of their biases and prejudices and are aware that their behavior offends others. Okay. Nevertheless, they continue with derogatory jokes, comments, and actions and act as though laws or company guidelines do not apply to them. Usually that lack of rule enforcement is something that people further outgrid is willing to go up against. But can I make a case for this one being there? That would make things a little bit more thought through. And maybe I could build a case for that. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts on it?
I think it would have to go closer to the somewhere in that green circle.
Somewhere in that green circle.
And I say that because, again, there is a degree of awareness that exists. Yet they are not yet ready to make change. And so they continue with that behavior and language that has an adverse impact on the organization and the people within it.
Right. And so they, again, to your point again, they'd be an amiable, no, they would be a driven, no, sorry. They would be an amiable, driven, amiable, as we're talking about, or simply a balanced, amiable. So these would be people who are trying to keep the peace. They don't really want to offend anybody. Maybe they do. See, that's why you need another word. If their motivation is to simply be and let be, so to learn on their own, change if they feel like changing, let other people learn on their own, change if they feel like changing, not trying to push the river, not trying to go out there and do anything. They are perpetuating something, but they're not, it's not like that's their cause. You with me? It's like that they're not trying to make it happen.
And there is a sense to of detachment too, because when you look at that description, where is it? It says that nevertheless, they continue with derogatory jokes, comments, and actions and act as though laws or company guidelines do not apply to them.
Right. So there is a detachment absolutely there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I can see how those five then we could build a logic that would support it laying on top of the heart line. So if I end up with someone who views their challenge as being a 10, 11, 12, and they think their ability is 10 or 11, 12, they could be out here in fighter, and that would feel very congruent with what we already know. Make them a little more amiable. They're change agents now, very much engaged to fulfill their intentions of making positive things happen. So I guess, Tim, the thing that I feel this model doesn't address in this very short excerpt is what happens if their motivations are unkind, their motivations are evil, impure, That's where that instigator comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think there's a certain element of fighter that can also be driven by negativity rather than trying to fight for the right. How come I can't fight against the right?
Yeah. I think that argument could be posed for 4 of the 5 of them for sure.
Yeah, that there is a negative expression of a lot of these. And that negative expression would either be more upgrid or downgrid. So if I'm a fighter and I want things to stay the way they are or move things backwards, am I going to be more upgrid or downgrid about the fight?
Right.
probably more upgrade.
But yeah, upgrade. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm saying, no, go back the way things always were. Life was better when women didn't have the vote. I mean, it applies to everything. Even if you look at what's, these decisions that have been made in recent years affecting women's health, it's like, well, someone was fighting against something that the majority of the country feels is very, what to say, appropriate, very understandable, very, okay, to under whatever guidelines they are going to spell. There's always going to be guidelines.
The kind of fighter that comes to mind to me is something that John Lewis used to always talk about, this idea of good trouble, he called it.
Good trouble. Yeah, all right. I can
Yeah,
see
so
that.
that comes out of, the civil rights era, the fighting for a specific purpose, for greater good for everyone, not,
Well,
just
exactly. And discomfort is part of that, because obviously in the human rights movement, they had to those that wanted change had to recognize that they were a group of people who were content with status quo. And so until they found status quo disturbing, why would they bother changing it? The fact that others are disturbed by the status quo may not have been something that got them involved in any way, in any real change way, other than staying with things the way they are. The conservative mindset rather than the, um, I don't want to say liberal, but the more evolved. Oh boy, that's an even worse value judgment, isn't it? Okay. Anyway, I said it. I'm holding true to it. All right. So, but we're at the top of the hour. I would like to continue this exploration, but Tim, I'm just kind of wondering about what are the negative expressions of these? Where do those negative expressions fit on the change grid? And how would the people on the positive track? I'm going to assume these change agents have positive motivations. And even these fighters that we're talking about here, they have positive motivations. Their heart's in the right place. Even the avoiders might have their heart in the right place. That we need to do that. But what if your heart isn't in the right place? Then where do you fall on the change grid?
Yeah, I think that's a worthwhile conversation, because the right place of your heart could be driven by your life experiences and what your level of awareness is around social matters and issues of diversity.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that
Right.
fighter could be, out there in the danger zone, but in their heart, they feel that they're in the right place.
Yeah, they do. But they're fighting, the fight for the right and the fight for the unjust or whatever. I mean, this is a battle that wages in courtrooms and philosophy all the time. We've got at least two different thoughts, and it's happening everywhere. One thing I'll share with you guys as a kind of a last comment on this is that I was reading an article about something that's going on in the LGBTQ I plus community. And that is that there are people who are LGB who do not like the TQI whatever part lumped in with LGB. And so they're actively coming out against that and saying, like, no, those other things that you're just trying to lump in to LGB are things that even members of the LGB community don't agree with. They're not ready to be that accepting or that whatever or unwoke or whatever words they want to give it. So this battle of the fight happening can even be happening inside of the group or one of the groups that is desperately trying to achieve whatever that equity and inclusion happens to be. Tim, is that something you guys talk about, that even inside of a movement, there's going to be different camps?
Most definitely. Most definitely.
And so what does that tell us? It tells us that prejudice is everywhere. That whatever it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
That's the challenge of the labeling anyway, right? That's kind of inherent with the label, because then there's always these perceptions that limit one's understanding of the label itself, especially when you're outside of that label circle, if you will.
Yep.
We see this in Black communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, African Americans, from a West Indian, from an African. They're very uniquely different.
Yep.
But if you see someone with the dark skin and you just say, "Oh yeah, that's a African American," well, I know people that will feel like, they'll push back on that because that
Yeah.
doesn't identify with it.
Right. Even when I was in college, there was a student group, and part of their big discussion was on campus, or as far as, the campus life and social behaviors were concerned, how were they identifying themselves and why were they identifying themselves in a particular way? So, you can imagine when I was in college, this is 40 some odd years ago. I mean, I'm going to be, oh, just so you guys know, there are only 7 shopping days remaining until my birthday. So, and as always, real estate is the perfect gift. Thank you. But anyway, so go back 40 some odd years ago. I can tell you that there was even a debate going on inside of the Black student community about, are they African American? Because a lot of them would define themselves as Caribbean American or whatever the case may be. And so even then, there's been an awareness and a debate and on and on. So yeah. All right, well, we'll continue this next time around, but let's look at the dark side of this whole model and see where the people that are not of pure heart might end up plopping on the grid, and why is that problematic?
Awesome.
Okay, all right, well, thanks so much. Tim, I don't know if you're available next Tuesday, but I certainly want to make sure that the next time we talk about this, you're able to be on the call. So
I will be.
Okay,
I
good.
will be. Yes.
All right, good. Then that's what we'll do next time around. So thanks, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.